responsible for deporting criminals. And she supports amnesty, rewarding illegals with citizenship. And Kamala's big lie about the border?
The border is secure.
Kamala lied about Biden's obvious mental decline. And oh boy, did she lie about the border. Make America Great Again Inc. is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Space station. Officials said the delay will give them more time to analyze problems on the company's Starliner spacecraft. 5 thrusters failed ahead of Starliner's June 6th arrival at the space station. Helium leaks in the capsule's propulsion system also popped up. Starliner test pilots Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams should have returned by mid-June. Now NASA is weighing all its options for getting the 2 veteran astronauts back to Earth, including a ride home in a SpaceX capsule. However, only 2 docking ports at the space station can accommodate U.S. astronaut capsules. Right now, both are occupied. Disney's streaming service turns a profit for the first time, and drugstore chain CVS is downgrading its future earning projections. NTD's Don Ma has those stories in today's Business Matters.
Disney returned to a profitable third quarter as its combined streaming business started making money for the first time, along with a very strong showing in theaters for the movie Inside Out 2. So operating income for the entertainment segment, which, by the way, includes its movie studio and parts of its television wing, nearly tripled to $1.2 billion. But there were some weakness showing in domestic parks, part of its experiences division that includes 6 global theme parks, its cruise line as well, and merchandise and video game licensing. So the company cautioned that the moderation in demand it saw at U.S. parks could linger for the next few quarters. Disney said that the decline in operating revenue for domestic parks and experience was because of increased costs driven by inflation, as well as technology spending and new guest offerings. But other than Disney, CVS Health chopped its 2024 forecast for the 3rd time this year and changed the leadership of its health insurance business, where it continued to struggle with rising costs. CEO Karen Lynch will lead the insurance segment, replacing Executive Vice President Brian Kane, who is leaving the company about a year after arriving. This is according to the healthcare giant on Wednesday. Rising claims from the company's Medicare Advantage coverage have hurt CVS Health for much of this year. And it has contributed as well to repeated trimmings of its outlook for 2024. Medicare Advantage plans are privately run versions of the federal government's coverage program, mainly for people age 65 and older. CVS Health also said Wednesday that it has been hurt by a drop in quality ratings for those plans and pressure from Medicaid coverage it manages in several.
Coming up, the U.S. joining forces with allies in the Pacific to hold military exercises, and international military strategist joins us to discuss the importance of the drills in the South China Sea. And the House is expected to pick up a bill to regulate kids' online safety, the first of its kind since 1998, but some warn of censorship. The full debate when we come back. The Philippines said Chinese forces tell the multi-nation naval and air force exercises. Joining me now to explore the tensions in the South China Sea is retired Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, who was a Black Hawk helicopter pilot in the U.S. Army and now an international military strategist. Darren, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, these are the first joint exercises by the 4 nations. What does this signal about the importance of the region?
Hi, Tiffany. Yeah, I think this clearly signals to China that multiple nations recognize the value of the South Asian trading routes, both land, sea, or all 3, land, sea, and air. And the only way to truly combat what China is trying to do to control the waters is to work like a team in a coalition environment and be able to show China that we can not only deter them, but if necessary, we can defend it in a greater amount of depth or more rigorously if necessary. So that is ultimately what China needs to see, is no nation is out there working on its own, but we all have our eyes on them.
And the Philippines said today that Chinese Navy ships tailed the joint military exercises. Given Beijing's more aggressive actions in the region, how should we read this move from Beijing?
I would call it mostly typical Beijing, looking more like the Cold War tactics that we saw 70s, 80s, and on, is navies tended to kind of get up close to each other and figure out what they were trying to do. And one of the biggest differences here, though, is that China clearly just outright claims these waters as their own. So anybody operating in many of these areas is going to get tailed closely by the Chinese, is partly as a threat, but partly as an intelligence collection, just so they can see how we or our allies might fight, either separately or together. So as this develops, I would anticipate they'll continue to be fairly aggressive, because ultimately it's going to come down to Xi Jinping thinks he has some sort of his own version of manifest destiny with the reunification of China, as he would describe it.
And as you mentioned, the Chinese regime claims the sea as its own, despite a ruling that this claim has no basis in international law. What should Western allies and partners do to ensure stability and peace in the region?
Well, first of all, they need to continue to exert their influence collectively and not individually, because we're all stronger together. It sounds cliche, but it is true. And at a time when the United States is dealing with multiple different fires around the world, not only the Ukraine-Russia conflict still going on, what we all see happening currently in the Middle East and what it could turn into, this requires that we work even more with our allies. And that is the biggest message we can send China. This is not just America against China potentially. This is Western nations as well as allies throughout the Pacific who recognize the threat and will not put up with it.
Expanding on that, this comes as the U.S. Navy is focusing more on the Middle East and the conflicts there. Now, Darren, we've spoken before about the Chinese regime's goal of involving the U.S. in 4 overseas wars, one with a terrorist group, so that the U.S. military will be stretched too thin. Is that what we're seeing here?
I think it is in some form, whether it's intentional or just that's what is happening. But to me, when you put all the pieces together, going back to not only the election of the Biden administration, but our failure in Kabul, the continuing crisis in Russia, Ukraine, and in the Middle East now, you can see this burgeoning reality of America embroiling ourselves in multiple conflicts around the world where we haven't really stopped some time and asked, what is our strategic goal? What are we trying to get at? Because what China wants to really do, or would take advantage of, is overwhelming the system, with specifically the United States at the middle of it. They get us involved in too many things, not only with our manpower and some of our systems, but the logistics behind all those systems that make them work, from weapons and ammunition to fuel. It's all there. So hopefully some of these conflicts will tame down, but unfortunately, the way I see it going right now, it doesn't seem like anybody's trying to slow it down.
On that note, a recent congressional report found that the U.S. military is ill-equipped to confront the threat of Russia and China. Given that, what do you see as the next steps the U.S. must take to avoid being taken by surprise by the Chinese regime?
Well, first of all, I think they better recognize the fact that, yes, to a point, we've been severely hampered in a lot of different ways with the military, but the American military is still the best military force this world has ever seen. And we can make a lot of mistakes, but we're going to learn fairly quickly if we absolutely have to, and we will. One of their concerns, though, is, of course, whether or not America soon has a different commander-in-chief in the administration that has been much more effective in diplomacy and economics before trying to engage the military. So I think that's ultimately what a lot of these nations who are our adversaries or however you want to describe that, are seeing us as it's a window of opportunity. They got to take advantage of it because things might change.
Darren Gobb, international military strategist and retired lieutenant colonel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany. Have a good night.
The Kids Online Safety Act, legislation that could become the first of its kind since 1998. The pressure is now on the House of Representatives to take up the bill after nearly the entire Senate voted in favor of it. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Only 3 senators voted against the Kids Online Safety Act, among them Senator Rand Paul, who argued that the bill allowed for the possibility of politically motivated censorship.
The Kids Online Safety Act, known as KOSA, would impose unprecedented duty of care on internet platforms. Imposing a duty of care on the internet platforms associated with mental health can only lead to one outcome: the stifling of First Amendment protected speech.
Senator Marsha Blackburn, who co-sponsored the bill, argued for regulations to the sorts of content that minors have access to.
But when you look at these social media platforms, there are no guardrails. And children are constantly exposed to content that encourages self-harm.
I spoke with Dmitry Bestushev, a former senior director of cyber threat intelligence at BlackBerry, and he believes that placing the duty of care on technological companies is not enough.
Because even if the companies, they're going to be using the best of their sources to regulate those things, in the end, how to know if a user profile actually belongs to a minor?
Mr. Bestushev also argued that it is against the interest of big technological companies to limit opportunities to collect data.
But in the end, we also have to understand that for the tech companies, this is first about profit, working on mathematic modules to display targeted information based on the intentions they have seen in minors while browsing and using the internet and applications. That is about money.
When Congress reconvenes mid-September, lawmakers will have only 3 weeks to consider the Kids Online Safety Act and also avert a government shutdown. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Coming up at the Olympics, a thriller in the men's 400-meter sprint as Quincy Hall comes away with gold. Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And people at the Paris Games are avidly trading pins, calling it the Olympics' unofficial sport. How the tradition dates back to the first modern games and what's keeping it alive. Stay tuned for that after the break.
The 2024 NTD 9th International Chinese Vocal Competition is scheduled to take place at Merkin Hall, Kaufman Music Center in New York from September 18th to 21st. The competition specially invites vocalists from the world-famous Shenyun Performing Arts to serve as judges. The prestigious Gold Award is $10,000. Chinese vocal artists aged 18 to 50 are welcome to register.
We are only 80 years removed from countries that killed 60 to 70 million people intentionally. And we have people being like, oh, it can't happen here. Yeah, it can. And it might.
These people, they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in anything except crushing people that are in their way.
There needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members.
A strong church can stop this.
Funny expression. There's a little scar right below his neck. The artist, on a trip to somewhere in South America, he met this kid who told him a story about himself. The technique is really good. So you'll see, like, in the foreground, there's water on his face. The texture is so realistic, but then sort of in the back you have these washed out colors almost